simply stunning that the material universe, if you go back far enough, reaches a singularity, a point where matter, space, time, and energy themselves come into existence. And as a consequence, there's really no material explanation that can be posited, because it's matter itself that comes into existence at a finite time ago. Even time and space apparently begin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Stephen Meyer saying that there's no explanation, like no non-religious or non-theistic explanation for the beginning of the universe that can be posited, is just a flat-out lie. We have perfectly fine explanations for the beginning of the universe that doesn't concern a god. And in fact, you have to make a lot of leaps in logic in order to propose that a god was necessary in order for this universe to come into existence. Hell, we don't even know if this is the first time this universe has come into existence. For all we know, it could just be an endless loop of universes being created over and over again. There's nothing that we know of that would prevent that. So if you heathens want to fuck around and find out how bad Stephen Meyer is at this whole creationist thing, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, this is a classic off-the-cuff response video to Dr. Frank Turek, who was either recently hosting or was recently on a podcast or something like that. But in any case, Dr. Stephen Meyer was there, and he's a well-known creationist scientist that is going to be giving us 3 easy-to-use arguments for creationism, or intelligent design, as they like to call it. Honestly, it doesn't really matter to me. Intelligent design, creationism, it's both the same shit. I don't know why you got to try to dress it up like it's like scientific or something. It's not. But in any case, Dr. Meyer is going to be giving us his 3 best arguments that are easy for you to bring up and throw at people that believe in evolution. The reigning most popular explanation for the diversity of life, as well as he's going to be throwing some salt in the way of the Big Bang theory and the hypothesis that we don't need a creator in order for this universe to come to existence. So he's just kind of all over the place as far as creationism goes tonight. But in any case, let's see what Dr. Stephen Meyer has for us.
What are 3 to 5 facts or arguments for intelligent design that are easy to comprehend and explain to somebody else?
I think what the host here, which I believe this is Frank Turek's co-host, is trying to say, or at least ask, is what are 3 easy to say arguments that we can just regurgitate on the spot without actually understanding what we're saying that will attempt to shut somebody up that is trying to prove or trying to talk about evolution? Because these people never really want to understand the shit that they're saying. They just want to regurgitate the shit that they're told. So distilling it down to an easy to repeat elevator pitch about creationism is in general what creationists are looking to do.
Oh, very good question. Well, I think the first is the one we've been talking about, that at the foundation of life in the DNA molecule, there is a 4-character digital code that is responsible for producing the proteins and protein machines that cells need to stay alive.
So this is a really big talking point amongst some of the more dipshitty creationists that I've talked to, but it's this claim that DNA is a code. And what they're talking about when they say this, because it's a bit of an equivocation and they're trying to convolute the conversation so that people don't know what's actually being talked about here. Because code, it can mean a lot of different things. Like you can encode things in certain ways so that you compress data. You can code things in many different ways. There's also natural code that exists. A good example of natural codes forming, it would be the codes that flowers have on them that is, in their genetic code, if you will, and how bees can see these codes. And so the bees being drawn to the flower and the flower pointing them in the direction of the pollen and the nectar, this has facilitated a symbiotic relationship between bees and flowers. This is a good example of a natural code that has developed. Without the need of any kind of intelligent designer or anything like that, we have perfectly reasonable scientific explanations for why the flowers that had these codes on them. But when Stephen Meyer says that DNA is a code, and a digital code at that, what he's trying to evoke is this sense that it's some kind of like programming code. And that's just completely wrong. First and foremost, DNA is a chemical, and the chemical reactions that happen, they happen because that is what nature has selected. That is the best possible combination of chemical reactions for life to exist. And because life does exist already, those particular chemical reactions will continue to happen in the ways that we have known them to operate. So, is DNA a code? In one sense, yes, it is. It is a code, but only in the natural coding sense, in that it developed naturally and it is all chemically based. These are chemical reactions that happen. So the codons in the DNA molecules, they operate via these chemical processes, and it's very apparent that God had no hand in this shit, because errors constantly happen, copying errors happen, shit doesn't run right, and but it runs right enough in order for life to still exist, and therefore you got genetic diseases and all this other kind of shit. So don't fall into this trap of agreeing that DNA is a code without first establishing the nuance in the term code.
And we know from our experience, our uniform and repeated experience, which is the basis of all scientific reasoning, that information comes from an intelligence, whether we're talking about the information in a computer program or information in a paragraph in a book or assembly instructions or information embedded in a radio signal.
Another thing that creationists routinely do not do, because they want to remain as vague as possible, is defining what they mean by information. The way that he seems to define information here is intelligently structured information, because all of the examples that he listed were, of course, intelligently constructed pieces of information. These are this is information that's encoded in order to communicate some kind of message from one entity to another entity, whether that be a computer system or like with the RF signals, or one human to another human. These are intelligently constructed coded signals that are meant to be interpreted by intelligent minds. But if we want to consider information on a deeper scale, literally anything can be information. And so saying that information only comes from an intelligent mind means jack shit. Like right now, what you're seeing on screen is a whole lot of visual information, like the color of the background behind me being black and orange and fiery and like I'm in hell or something. Like that's information. If you just go out into the world and you look at a tree, the green color coming off of it can be interpreted as information. Like if you don't distill down what you mean by information, then it literally means nothing as far as proving whether or not a creator exists. Just because a photon reflects off of a leaf and only the green portion of that particular electromagnetic spectrum is reflected, and therefore our eyes take that information in, the cones in the back of our eyeballs see that green color and transmit that information to our brains, there is nothing that needs God in that. That is all physics. Just like with any other bit of information that he could point to, it doesn't necessarily require an intelligence. But like I pointed out before, The only things that he seemed to have listed here are things that require an intelligence behind them. But he's trying to draw this connection between these things that are obviously intelligently designed and connect them to things that were not intelligently designed, like the DNA molecule. There's no reason to assume that was designed. And if somebody did design it, then he's a shitty fucking engineer. There are so many problems with the whole DNA molecule system as far as being the basis of life that it really should have been taken back to the drawing board if you actually engineered it. But if it came about naturally, this makes a lot of sense that it would not be perfect. Under the natural explanations, DNA and all of its flaws makes total sense. Under the idea of a god designing it, it literally makes no fucking sense whatsoever.
Whenever we see information, we always come to a mind. It has always come from a mind, not a material process. So the discovery of information at the foundation of life is decisive evidence for a designing mind in the origin of life. That's one big argument.
Well, this is just simply not true. Any physical process that seems to communicate some bit of information that we interpret would not require a grander intelligence. Like anything that you can think of, rain, the rain cycle, that physical process does not require a god. And we know this because most of the people on the planet have stopped doing rain dances. They've also stopped sacrificing small children in order to get the crops to grow or some shit. Like, we know that these things, these physical processes don't require a god. These physical processes would also qualify for his very vague definition of what information is. So his statement that no physical processes communicate any kind of information is just total fucking bullshit.
The second one is the argument from fine-tuning. If you look at this is something that physicists have been discovering since the 1950s, that the basic laws of physics and the initial conditions of the universe were set up just right to allow for the possibility of life within very fine tolerances.
So our universe permits our kind of life to exist. There's no way that he can say that another universe couldn't pop up with different properties and still allow life. There actually has been a study done where they ran simulations on different values for these, very fine tolerances that he's talking about. And there are plenty of other configurations that would permit life. So spare me the bullshit there, Dr. Stephen Meyer, when you're sitting there telling me that, it has to be this way for any kind of life, which is what he's implying here, any kind of life to exist. Nuh-uh, dipshit, because that only means that our kind of life exists here. And in order to get our kind of life and our kind of universe, we would need to have these constants and all of these fine-tuning things would have to be set to their particular settings for our universe. It's not for any universe. These people are so myopic that they can't see outside of their own personal experience of the universe. They can't fathom a universe that exists in different ways. Did you know that here on Earth, we've actually found living organisms in some of the most inhospitable environments? So don't sit there and tell me that this particular universe is the only kind of universe that can support life. It's very obvious that that is not true.
So you have these, for example, the strength of the gravitational attraction or the expansion rate of the universe. If any of these factors were off by a little bit, a little stronger, a little weaker, a little faster, a little slower, then life would not be possible in our universe.
You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of the claim that if the Earth was just a little bit closer to the sun or a little bit farther away, life wouldn't exist here. And so therefore, God had to put it in its perfect orbit. But they fail to realize that there is a deviation in the orbit of the Earth around the sun. Sometimes we're closer to it. On a universal scale, just a little bit closer to it and just a little farther away from it at various times during the year. But that doesn't kill us, because you know what? nature is not perfect. Basically, the Earth would have to free fall into the sun for like a whole month before we would start to burn up or some shit. So don't give me this shit about just a little bit farther away or a little bit closer. Same thing here with just a little change in all of these different fine-tuning constants, and we're just fucked. That's not true. Also, he's not really defining what he means by just a little bit of a change. And he's being purposefully vague here, maybe because he doesn't want to go into the actual scientific research. But like I said, there have been studies done before where they have tested the changing of the universal constants. And needless to say, plenty of other universes have come into existence with different values. The underlying physics of this reality, like of this universe, they could change in another universe with different constants. So if the constants are different, what's to say that the physical formulas, like the physical laws of that universe, aren't also different? This is what I'm talking about with them having a myopic view, thinking that this universe is the only universe that could ever exist, and that the way that this universe works has to be the only way a universe can work. And none of this requires a god.
So physicists sometimes talk about our universe as a kind of Goldilocks universe where everything is just right. But as one great astrophysicist, Sir Fred Hoyle, put it, he said that a common sense interpretation of this evidence suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics and chemistry to make life possible. So the fine tuning of our physical universe is a powerful evidence for intelligent design.
But you see, you fail to inform people that common sense is often wrong. And just because common sense tells you something, doesn't automatically mean that it's correct. If by common sense you mean lazy as fuck, then yeah, I agree with you. It's lazy as fuck to just go with your common sense on these things. For one thing, most people that use their common sense about things that they know nothing about are most likely going to be wrong. And that's exactly what Dr. Stephen Meyer is asking you to do here. Are you an astrophysicist? Are you a theoretical physicist? If not, then your common sense is going to be completely different and is probably going to be wrong.
And then the systems that Scott works on, not necessarily the virulent ones, but the aboriginal systems, these beautifully designed molecular machines, provide evidence of a kind of master engineer at the foundation of life.
So his third one is basically just molecular machines. I guess like cells and maybe single-celled organisms. Those are evidence of God. This feels like just a rehash of a previous one. So really, you've only got two so far that you've covered, because this last one's just kind of a rehash, I think. Oh, unless maybe he means the complex physical mechanics of like flagellum and all these other things that people like Dr. Stephen K. Meyer often say are irreducibly complex. If that's what he's talking about, which I'm not sure if he is, you can go out there and find studies right now that disprove that completely. Because like, just take the bacterial flagellum or the flagellum in general. We've been able to take out genes very specifically that remove certain proteins that are used in building the flagellum. And at every single step, we find that the flagellum does not disappear. In fact, the only effect that it has is how mobile the flagellum is. How good is it at doing its job of moving around the single-celled organism that it's attached to? It does not disappear. If anything is irreducibly complex, then you should be able to tamper with just one small piece of it and it all falls apart and it does not develop or it does not work. And that's simply not what we find with any, and I repeat, any of the supposed irreducibly complex mechanical systems or whatever that we find in organisms.
So those are three. I'm writing about others in my book on the return of the God hypothesis. I think another powerful evidence that is not so much evidence just for intelligence, but for a transcendent form of intelligence, is that the universe had a definite beginning. Mm-hmm. This is something that's come into our awareness through astrophysics and astronomy over the last 100 years, as scientists formulated what was first called the Big Bang Theory. And And this is simply stunning that the material universe, if you go back far enough, reaches a singularity, a point where matter, space, time, and energy themselves come into existence. And as a consequence, there's really no material explanation that can be posited because it's matter itself that comes into existence at a finite time ago. Even time and space apparently began.
Yes, time and space did begin at that point, but that doesn't mean that reality began at that point. But him saying that there's no physical or, I guess, non-supernatural explanation for the beginning of the universe is just horseshit. Right now, the leading scientific theory about how the Big Bang actually occurred is that there was a fluctuation in a quantum scalar field. This quantum scalar field was in a false vacuum state. So not a true vacuum state, not truly zero, just a false one. And so it fluctuated from that false vacuum state into a true vacuum state. And when it did that, it released a huge amount of energy. Now, what they call this energy is like inflaton particles, or inflaton energy. This energy transforms into these inflaton particles, and then the particles, they will transform into what would eventually become matter today. Of course, it took like 300,000 years for light to even be able to travel through the universe because it was so hot and dense, light could not even travel through it. But also, it took that long for the first atoms to even start to appear. It's just so strange for him to say that there's no material explanation for it when there literally is.
And so this is something that you would expect on a theistic view of the world. In fact, if you're a Christian, you're a Jew, you'll remember the first words of the Bible in the beginning. And the modern astrophysics has discovered that there was in fact such a beginning. And so I think that's another thing to put all of this evidence in context. You have evidence of design, but also evidence of design from the very beginning of the universe and the fine tuning, and evidence of a beginning in these discoveries from astronomy and astrophysics.
Well, yes, there was like in the beginning with God, but doesn't that kind of like really argue against you? Because if you're saying that God is eternal, then how is there a beginning? That would be a really good question that somebody could answer. That if the Bible presents an eternally existing God, how could there be a beginning? But also, there's a big difference in how the Bible portrays the beginning of the universe and how the beginning of the universe is most likely to have happened. Because in the Bible, God speaks an incantation and creates shit, okay? Also, God was floating over the waters, I guess. Like, there was just water everywhere. Like, water existed everywhere or some shit like that. I don't know. He just sort of floated over the waters, over the void or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. But in any case, God spoke an incantation and created everything through his son, Jesus Christ's asshole. Okay. He just put him on like a silencer or something like that and went and created it, shining light out of Jesus's asshole, apparently. So that's how the Bible presents it. I was a little liberal in my explanation. And then how science presents it is a totally material and physical process that could happen multiple times if necessary or if allowed. So it doesn't seem to me like the very beginning of the universe is proof of anything when we have a physical process that can explain it. Just like with every other natural process that we have, if we have a physical and natural process to explain why something happens, then guess what? We don't need a fucking God to explain it. We don't need it. So I don't know why people keep proposing it like it's some kind of novel idea. It's not. We don't require a magically old magician in order to cast an incantation and create shit. It can just happen on its own. It's been shown that it can happen on its own. And by that, I mean like virtual particles, which is not exactly like just popping into existence, especially not through an incantation, but it's just a natural thing about reality where these virtual particles, they change in their energy levels. They change energy. They go back and forth between the two, and they seem to pop in and out of existence. So, I mean, it's amazing to me that somebody can be so uneducated about this particular area of science, but yet speak so authoritatively on it. It's always mind-boggling to me. But anyways, I'd love to hear what you heathens thought about this. Do you think that Stephen Meyer had a good point? I mean, I don't, but I'd love to hear what you thought. And hey, while you're doing that in the comments, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of video. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.